Gene, if you could keep trying to get into that, because I know we have in the past, we've had to edit old YouTube stream comments unless they changed the platform quite recently. You know, there should be a way to do that and reference the new YouTube stream, and we'll just take it as a lesson learned for next time. And I think we should open up the meeting. Looks like it's a couple minutes after 9, so feel free to admit folks, Bob.
Got it. Just a minute. 16.
Patrick, I have the new link displayed on a Word doc I can share here for anyone to disseminate. Bob, can you check with Holly about updating the website link? I'll go check that. Access, Patrick.
Good morning. It looks like we're live.
Right. Good morning, everybody. We're admitting just a couple more people into the room, and we'll begin just momentarily. Until then, welcome everybody to the Central Valley Waterboard Strategic Planning Session. This is a facilitated session. We will be recording, and we'll go through introductions in just a minute.
Just confirmed I cannot add comments to that old stream, Patrick. Sorry. I just confirmed I can't edit that old link, Patrick. I can't add a comment. I can display it here.
Mindy, if you could send that link out to the other board members, I'd appreciate it. To everybody on the call, we had to switch our YouTube stream, and so the link that was sent out will not work. We will be trying to get the word out. Gene, if you could put up the new link on that Word document, I'd appreciate it. That is the new link to the YouTube stream. If you have somebody you know that would be otherwise streaming this, not participating via the Zoom link, feel free to send them to the RB5 strategic plan to get the Zoom credentials, or go right ahead and provide that information to them. And with that, I think we can begin the presentation. I'll turn it first to Lisa for a brief introduction, and then we will proceed to introduce the rest of the board members and the board strategic planning committee who are participating here today.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. And as you can see, we've got a nice group of people that have joined us. We're going to be going through, basically, we want you to be involved today. We're going to have a chat. We're going to ask people to open their mics and talk. And we're going to be helping the board work through their strategic plan as they're thinking about what they want to put into the content. I'm Lisa Butler. I'll be your facilitator today. And we do have a little poll to kind of see who else is with us. So would this be a good time to cue that, Patrick, to
Absolutely.
go ahead and let people, so we'll take up the first one. We'd just like to get a feeling for who's with us today. So we'll throw up a quick poll. And we'll let that get queued up. Oh, there it is. And we're just trying to understand a little bit about who's in the audience. So if you could click and let us know. And while you're doing that, we'd really like to thank everybody that's joined us in person. Our hope is this really is going to be interactive. The board would really like to hear from you and find out your ideas. And we've got most of you've clicked in there. We're looking for just a few more.
Okay, let me know when to end it.
Yeah, it looks like no one's declined to stay, so that's a good sign, Patrick.
Fantastic. And I know, fortunately or unfortunately, I think there's a tribal beneficial use meeting scheduled concurrently. That a tribal only invitation went out. So that may be one of the reasons why we're not getting too many of the tribal members or affiliates kind of showing up here today. But bear in mind, we will continue to reach out and touch base with them as we proceed with the strategic plan. So thank you so much. I'll take over. Jean, if you could put the presentation up.
I'll start the presentation.
Fantastic. All right, next slide. And again, welcome everybody to the board strategic planning facilitated workshop session. Myself, I am Patrick Palupa, Executive Officer, Central Valley Water Board. With us today, we have Lisa Butler, who has been working with us to put together this little workshop here today. We also have members of the Strategic Planning Committee here. That includes a number of board staff who applied for and have been working with the board's executive management team and the board's work group to help formulate the strategic plan. The board's work group are the first two people listed here, and Dr. Carl Longley, the board chair, and Mark Bradford, board member. I'll let them introduce themselves in just 1 minute. The rest of the Strategic Planning Committee includes Lynn Koster, Maxine Cottrell, Chris Flowers, Christine Croyle, Rebecca Asami, Jonathan Muir, and Christine Croyle, and Clint Snyder. And so those are members of the strategic planning group who have been working together with the board's work group on this particular effort. And then I'll let Carl and Mark introduce themselves with just a couple words.
Thank you, Patrick. First of all, I welcome the folks who joined us today. This for us is a very important exercise. I was telling the staff working on this that I didn't think many folks would show up. They didn't the last time we did this a few years back, well, quite a few years back. But I'm pleasantly surprised to find out that we have a large number of folks out there who want to work through this exercise with us. This is critical to how we do business in the future, and we welcome your input. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. This is Mark Bradford. I'm on Central Valley Board as well. And I'm very interested in this whole process. I know strategic planning can be a long, drawn out road for some people, but it's an important part of a 5 to 7 year plan. And as Carl said, I'm happy to see we've got 40 participants on this call. And also we got over 400 and some odd responses to the survey that went out, which shows a pretty broad interest in the subject across the Central Valley from all of our constituents, environmental advocates, agriculture, industry, EJ community. So I think this is an important aspect of what the board does, and it'll help kind of provide that roadmap going forward. So thanks for everybody participating today.
Fantastic, and thanks for that introduction. Jean, if you could resume on slide 3. And just to note that YouTube live stream has changed. The new YouTube live stream is there displayed on the screen. For email questions and comments, please contact rb5s-strategicplan@waterboard.ca.gov. We also have if you are interested in these matters, we can subscribe you to future notifications as well. I'm going to run through very quickly a few meeting logistics and then get to the proposed agenda here today. So if you could, slide 2. Next slide, sorry. So for audio options, I think many of us have become familiar with that. There is a mute and unmute button down at the bottom of your screen on the left. Next slide. If you want to see the list of participants, feel free to click on that. We will also have a chat open. Next slide. And you can certainly provide nonverbal feedback during the course of this. So feel free to raise your hand if you need to speak or if you're curious in speaking. We also have some other options for participating there. Next slide. And then as we can see, there's already people active in the chat. The chat will be active throughout this session. We will be checking into it and seeing as folks post questions, post concerns, post opinions, and all of that we will be absorbing and recording and presenting to the board along with the discussion here today in April. Next slide. And this is some of the logistics of the chat. Again, I think a year ago, this would have been new to many people. By now, I'm sure many of you are used to dealing with this over and over again. You can select who you chat with. You can, for the purposes of this meeting, feel free to blast it to everybody. It's rare that we're going to have a discussion that won't prompt some questions, some concerns, some comments. Next slide. Let me briefly go over the workshop goals here today. So we are engaged in a strategic planning process. As Board Member Bradford said, we're really trying to understand what the board's priorities should be for the next 5 to 7 years. So that's pretty ambitious. And the fact that we undertook this at the start, even before the pandemic occurred, was ambitious. I think it became even more so, but even more critical as we began to operate in the circumstances that are driven by the pandemic and by the special meeting procedures and things that we are currently in the midst of, and hopefully towards the end of. But the workshop goals here today are to explore opportunities to increase satisfaction with board decision-making processes, to build an enhanced understanding of stakeholder priorities and issues, and to refine the concepts for potential inclusion in the regional board strategic plan, which will be a written document that we will hopefully finish this summer, and again will guide the board as it charts its course for the next 5 to 7 years. Next slide. I'll get a little bit into the agenda, and then we are starting off with the opening remarks. That's where we are right now. I'll give a brief discussion of the Central Valley Water Board, where our roles and our responsibilities are. Again, I think many of the people participating are quite familiar with that, but I think one of the things that was revealed through the strategic planning survey that we'll describe in just a little bit is that we still have a ways to go for letting everybody know where our roles are, where our responsibilities are as an agency, where they overlap with other entities, and where we can partner with other agencies and other nonprofits, et cetera, that to essentially meet our goals. I'll talk a little bit about the strategic planning process and timeline. Clint will share a little bit about that as well, where we have been, where we are going. The meat of this discussion here today will be the 6 discussion topics that you've seen on the agenda that's been posted on the website. And then we'll get into a summary and next steps with a closing by Chair Carl Longley. Next slide. So really quickly for the ground rules, try and do one mic. I think from what we can gather from folks on the call today, you're mostly experienced with this, but if you open up a mic on your cell phone and one on your computer, we'll have to mute you, and put your cell phone away from the computer. That helps with the clarity of your conversation. Step up, step back is something that I think is valuable for just about every meeting, particularly meetings where we have people with strong opinions. Make your opinion known, and then feel free to step back and let other people discuss that opinion and share their opinions of their own. Be present is something that's also incredibly important. And I think the temptation is to check other emails and do other things when we're engaged in these type of processes. I would ask everybody to try and be present as much as you can, to be engaged in these topics. I think we wind up with a better process and a better product if we do that. And lastly, stay on topic. We have a very short timeline for the discussion of our 6 main discussion points. So we're going to try very hard to make sure that all 6 of those we get to over the course of today. And that requires everybody staying on topic as we discuss them. Next slide. So very quickly, I will go into the alphabet soup of all the agencies that we work with. This is only a limited scattering of them for orientation for folks who are not used to dealing with us as an entity. We are under the Cal EPA umbrella. We are joined with the State Water Resources Control Board. We are one of 9 regional water quality control boards. These are actually independent boards. So our board members are selected by the governor, nominated by the governor. They go through the Senate for confirmation and exercise a degree of independence from the State Water Resources Control Board to more effectively address local issues and local concerns. We also partner with a lot of different other agencies. Some of the responses that we got back from our strategic planning survey include a lot of things that are under the responsibility or we have overlapping responsibility for with other entities. Those include the Department of Water Resources, which is under the California Natural Resources Agency. So you see that on the right. We also have a lot of comments that touch on areas in which we share responsibility with one of the 38 county offices that we have within our region, or within some of the other agencies, both at the federal level and the state level, that we interact quite frequently with. That includes the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the California Department of Public Health, where previously the State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water used to be, the Bureau of Reclamation, CalGEM, the former Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, now known as the California Department of Conservation's Geologic Energy Management Division. So all of these entities are areas in which we work with other folks and to achieve our goals. Next slide. And so within the water boards, we also get some comments about things that are the responsibility of entities that respond or report directly to the State Water Board. So the State Water Board obviously has a very different kind of setup than we do, but we have a very, very close relationship with the State Water Board. They cut the checks. They are the Division of Financial Assistance. They oversee water rights throughout the state. Division of Drinking Water, as I mentioned earlier, is within the State Water Board. And in addition, the Division of Water Quality works on a lot of general orders, including the statewide stormwater orders, this number of state petition orders, and state policies that all of the regional boards are required to follow. Next slide. And here's a map. We are about 42% of the surface area of the state of California at Region 5, covering about 38 counties. And there's a couple sliver of counties, as you see in the very bottom. It goes all the way from Goose Lake down to northern LA County. So the entire Central Valley falls within this board's jurisdiction. We have 3 offices, as many of you know, one in Rancho Cordova, one in Redding, and one in Fresno. And of course, all of our staff are still working remotely these days, including myself. So there are offices scattered throughout the region at this point. Next slide. And now I'll turn it over to Clint Snyder to discuss the timeline of the strategic planning effort and where we've been so far.
So Patrick, before we leave your section too, just for context, why is it important for people to understand the relationships and the roles, particularly as you're working on the strategic plan?
I think it's super important because in many cases, we never want to respond to a stakeholder request with a simple, oh, we don't do that. Because virtually everything that occurs related to water in the Central Valley will have a nexus to water quality, whether that's, something that falls, whether oil field regulation that falls under CalGEM's purview, whether it's moving water around, that's done by the Bureau of Reclamation or done by Department of Water Resources. All of that tends to have a nexus with water quality. And so in many cases, even if the issue that is being raised by a stakeholder doesn't fall squarely within our authority, we usually can help get the job done by working with one of our partner agencies, either at the state, federal, or local level, to get the solution or the answer that you're looking for. Even if it's the answer that you don't want, at least we can kind of figure out who the players are, guide you to the people who are making the decisions that affect you on your day-to-day basis. And I think that's really integral to how we address these concerns within the context of our strategic plan.
Great, thank you. And I didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead.
Oh, no, by all means, by all
Okay.
means. And feel free to raise your hand if you have questions as we move through this slide deck. We do have time carved out for discussion, but this is meant to be an interactive thing. So feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or concerns as we're making these presentations. So with that, I will turn it over to Clint.
Yeah, I just reiterate what Patrick said. We really intend this to be interactive. So it's always helpful to get just a couple of hands popping up to get that machine running. So if you do have a question, please don't be bashful. Here, I just wanted to, I guess first I'll introduce myself. I'm Clint Snyder. I'm one of the assistant executive officers of the Central Valley Waterboard, and I manage the board's Reading office and have been participating along with the board members and the committee to put the strategic plan together. To provide a little context before we really start jumping into the weeds, just want to give you an overview of sort of where we're at in this process. And to me, I kind of look at this in phases, 4 phases really. The first phase is kind of an internal analysis where we work with the board members and the strategic planning group and our internal program managers to kind of analyze our current practices. That includes kind of the business side of things, as well as the program side of things, including our administrative group. So we've kind of worked through that now. The second phase is really to build on and refine our understanding of the issues through your lens. How do you see the board? How do you view the board's programs? How do you view our interaction? Our hope is that through this process, and that includes the survey and today's workshop, that we will be in a position to culminate both phase 1, that internal analysis, in addition to our external analysis, so to speak, culminate that information and take it back to the board for phase 3. Phase 3 really being the board wrestling with that, the committee wrestling with all that information, synthesizing it, and working toward the completion of that strategic plan. The fourth and final phase, as I see it, is really that implementation phase. And I think oftentimes that piece kind of gets left off. I know many of you have probably participated in strategic planning efforts in the past, some of those being more fruitful than others. Oftentimes they result in a nice report, so to speak, that kind of sits on a shelf. This certainly isn't the intent here. And I really do think that the Central Valley Waterboard, more so than a lot of them, are uniquely situated in that we have 19 programs within our region. We have 19 program managers who oversee and develop annual work plans each year. And those work plans really steer the activities of each and every staff person in our region. And so through that exercise and through the development of the strategic plan, the program managers will have a constant eye on what the strategic plan sort of calls out as values and goals over the next 5 to 7 years, and we'll be developing their annual work plans to match and mirror the goals that are outlined in that strategic plan. So with that, the The timeline that's before you right now kind of lays out sort of where we've been and where we're going. In August 2019, we initiated this effort. In 19 and 20, the board, as part of that internal analysis, reviewed our mission statement, vision statement. We held some sessions as part of the board meetings to talk with board members about what they valued, areas that they thought were important to consider. In the summer of 2020, we engaged with the program managers, interviewed them, talked in depth about the issues affecting their programs. And then through that internal analysis, we developed that outreach plan and issued the survey that I'll be talking about in a second. And then today is really to kind of dig in a little bit deeper, get just a better understanding of some of the responses that we received through that survey. And then moving forward, the spring, summer 2021, we'll be continuing on those board member discussions to button up the strategic plan. So next slide. So I want to talk just a bit about that survey that we sent out. I hope it's safe to assume that all of you had an opportunity to participate in that survey. If not, you'll have an opportunity today to provide some feedback on a few of those subjects that we want to learn a little bit more from you about. The survey was open from January 11 through February 22nd. We got an amazing response, over 450 respondents from throughout the region, all backgrounds, all interests, some industry groups, some EJ, some just concerned citizens. I think it was very well received, and the feedback that we garnered will just be valuable in this project. Just to note too, though, that survey also wasn't just external. We included a piece in there for employees as well. We wanted to understand their perspectives as we move forward in considering all the information. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Lynn Coster, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the survey and lead us into topic one.
And before you go, we do have a quick question. Bruce, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I think this is a good time. So Patrick, thanks for your slide that showed all the other agencies that
and Bruce, the group doesn't know you, so go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, so Bruce Hadelschelt, Northern California Water Association. We're the third party that represents the Sacramento Valley Agricultural Water Quality Coalition. And thank you, Lisa, for making sure that that those who didn't know who I was did. So Patrick, thank you for showing that PowerPoint about other state agencies and federal agencies and regions throughout the state. Bridging from that slide to Clint's opening remarks, and you can address this now or as we move on, but did you look at other state agencies' models for increasing stakeholder satisfaction, or some of the other I'm sorry, some of the other 6 priorities that we're going to be discussing today? Did you look at other agency models?
I don't know, Patrick, if you want to take that one, or.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we've looked into. I've participated in other agencies' work on this. I think we try and tailor it as much as we can to the specific situation of our agency, and frankly to the resources that we have at our disposal to do that type of work. I think that tends to drive it. I know I've met frequently with people at CDPH, at Caltrans, at Natural Resources, DWR, Fish and Wildlife, CDFA. All of them, their different kind of projects are fairly issue specific. So, we can learn from them in bits and pieces, but I think big picture is something we have to roll up our sleeves and kind of do ourselves.
That's great. Bob, was there a reason that you asked about? Was there something in particular you were thinking about? Or Bruce, excuse me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Lisa. There was, and I was about to type it into the chat. So DWR and their Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, recognize that a term term I like to use, subsidiarity, that local situations and local folks are best equipped primarily to accomplish the missions and goals. So I was wondering if you looked at that model in thinking about how you could respond to how that would fit into strategic plan, primarily the first topic on increasing stakeholder satisfaction with board processes, and topic 4, cost of compliance.
No, certainly. I'm quite familiar with that type of work. And when I kind of flagged resources, I had a feeling those are the type of things that you would be talking about. Our money is your money. And I think that's kind of one of the big things, at least speaking to dischargers. And certainly DWR has a component of that as well. But DWR also has a lot more resources to put into those efforts. So there are, the budget for that particular component was several $1 million, and we're on the other hand, we're kind of doing this on a shoestring, kind of attendant to what our obligations are as we develop permits, develop basin plans, develop things like that. So I think we certainly hear you, but when I say we are limited in copying other models because we are, we're fee driven. We don't have a lot of pool of resources that we can pull to kind of engage. Certainly, at sometimes the extent that we want to. That's one of the limitations that we work under, and certainly something that the board is sensitive to. And trying to find the right balance there is something that is critical. And I know, when you talk about cost of compliance, I think that's one of the things that we factor in. We don't develop a multi-million-dollar engagement effort because that would come on the back of fee payers. And so that's a decision I think that is made at the upper levels of this organization and at the State Water Board to try and keep our efforts tailored to the situations as they present themselves.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Bruce, for jumping in. We're going to go ahead and move to Lynn and start working through our topics. We're a teeny bit behind. We had several of you notice we had a little bit of a rough start. We were having some technical difficulties and trying to sort out the multiple streams. So I've actually even got some text messages from people going, "Hey, are you guys live?" So the answer is yes, and thank you everyone for being patient. With that though, I'm going to jump to Lynn. We want to dive in and make sure we have enough time for the rest of the content. So Lynn, take it away.
Okay, next slide, please. So I'm Lynn Coster. I'm one of the Strategic Planning Committee members, and I'm in the Reading office. So Clint mentioned that we conducted a strategic planning survey earlier this year. One of the questions asked respondents to identify which water quality issues they thought should be the highest priority for the Central Valley Water Board to address in the next 5 to 7 years. The survey included 26 proposed water quality issues that were listed, and the respondents were asked to rate them as essential, a high priority, medium priority, low priority, or not a priority. Respondents also had an opportunity to add issues that were not on the list. There were 326 responses to the question. The attached bar graph shows the responses that were ranked highest as essential or high priorities. The top priorities listed or identified in the survey are shown in green on the graph, and these were essential priorities. The highest ranking was addressing the impact of climate change and drought on water quality. Second highest was working to reduce the cost of compliance. Third was long-term salinity management. Fourth was requiring cities to clean up trash in their storm sewers. Next was implementing the CV Salts nitrate control program. And 6 was studying the cost of compliance. The graph also shows the top issues of the respondents that respondents selected as a high priority that are shown in blue. As you can see, many of these issues are the same as the top essential issues. Next slide, please. After reviewing the results of the survey, we identified some gaps in the information and topics that we wanted to dive deeper into with you in order to further understand your priorities and issues and how we can better engage with stakeholders. The topics we will be discussing today are stakeholder satisfaction, concerns of underserved and underrepresented communities, climate change and drought, the cost of compliance, special concerns for zero trash and homelessness, and lastly, stakeholder engagement post-COVID. Next slide, please. The first topic that we would like to get additional feedback on is increasing stakeholder satisfaction with board processes. Next slide, please. The survey asked for input on familiarity with the Central Valley Water Board's 19 program areas. There were 361 responses to this question. The graph shows the compilation of not so familiar and not at all familiar responses. As shown, some of the programs that respondents were most unfamiliar with include the oil field program, the mines program, administrative support, cannabis, and the forest activities program. The results of this question show a lack of familiarity with many of our programs and prompted us to ask for additional feedback on engaging stakeholders with board processes. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Great, thank you. And once again, a couple things. For a board that's preparing a strategic plan, what they're looking at is the things that they want to pay a lot of attention to, where they can get a lot of bang for their buck. So that's kind of one of the focus areas that they're looking at. So for this next one, let's go ahead and go to the next slide then and pose our questions. So, oops, go back, sorry. So the question is, how can we increase your satisfaction with the board processes? And I think I noticed, Bruce, you actually got us started with this question and some of the things that you asked us about. But if everyone online with us could take a minute and just kind of do a little bit of thinking. And if we go back and look at the data sets, we have two things. We've got a lack of familiarity with programs, which possibly is one of the barriers with people having an understanding about how they can interact with the data. And then also areas where people had highlighted some priorities. So if you wouldn't mind, take a minute or two, go to the chat and just give some feedback on how we can increase satisfaction with the board programs. And this is to help the group understand, help the planners understand more about what they should be focusing on in the strategic plan. So I'll ask people to start chatting, and I'm very patient. And then I'll actually, if I don't see any chat, I'm going to start calling on people.
Lisa, there are also two hand raises, Bonnie and Karen.
Super, thank you, Megan. Great, oh, great. And I am seeing some people starting to put some more ideas in. Great. And we're going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes on this one. Bonnie, go ahead and hop in and tell us your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Can you hear me?
We can, and go ahead and introduce yourself to the group.
Great. My name is Bonnie Starr, and I work with the Sacramento River Source Water Protection Program. I want to thank the Regional Board for hosting the Strategic Planning Workshop and accepting our stakeholder input. We are a group of drinking water agencies in the Sacramento and Bay Area that utilize the Sacramento River and its tributaries, including the American River, as our primary drinking water supply for over 2 million customers. And we don't own much of any of the watershed in the Sacramento and American River. So we rely heavily on the management efforts of the State Board and the Regional Board to protect the surface water quality of the Sacramento and American Rivers to ensure that our immune beneficial use is still continuing to be the high quality that it has been. And over the years, we've acted as a stakeholder on a wide variety of topics with the State Board and the Regional Board, both formally and informally. And we just want to make sure that the future endeavors of the Regional Board include a very strong and clear commitment to protecting our immune beneficial use and ensuring that the high quality is there. Specific to satisfaction with board processes, we wanted to recommend that the Regional Board really reconsider the content and use of late revisions in basin plan amendments. Over the course of the past few years, there's been several late revisions to proposed amendments that came after the comment period closed, but prior to the public hearing. And some of those were very substantive in content and changed the structure of the BPA, specifically the revised secondary MCL policy of the salt and nitrate control program. And essentially those comments came in the revisions came in so late that it was very difficult for us to be able to provide adequate assessment and appropriate input to the board for consideration prior to adoption. It didn't really allow for a full discussion of those changes and allow us to provide, thoughtful input on the development of it. So what we would like to suggest, if substantive late revisions are made, we think that the Regional Board would really need to consider delaying a hearing to ensure that there is sufficient time for stakeholder participation to be fully engaged.
Thank you, Bonnie. Karen, I'm going to go to you next, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yes, certainly. Karen Ashby with Larry Walker Associates. Work with a number of municipalities, districts, et cetera, stormwater, wastewater, watershed-based processes. And the one comment that I wanted to share is thinking in terms of stakeholder processes. There's kind of one approach for stakeholder processes and groups where it's what I'm going to call maybe more traditional. There's key check-in points, right? Kind of CEQA scoping meetings, and then you might have a draft that you roll out. And I would like to continue to encourage the board to embrace the more interactive maybe processes that I'll call them. Things like maybe CV Salts is a really good example. When we worked very closely with board staff in the region-wide stormwater permit was a bit of a different process where we were really working, side by side with board staff. So it wasn't, we were just kind of handed a draft. We were working to create that with board staff and being able to resolve a lot of issues as they came up instead of trying to react to things kind of later in the process. So I would just really like to strongly encourage the board. I know that at times it may seem to be very difficult, but I think that we work through the difficulties either up front or on the back end. And I think up front is so much more productive. So that's just what I would say. If we can continue to have that as a priority for how the interactions occur, that would be greatly appreciated.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing the team nod, so thank you for that great feedback. I also want to express appreciation. People have been putting some wonderful comments in the chat. This is great. I'm going to just check if anybody has the last thought. I'm going to try to get us back on schedule. And once again, thank you to everyone for your patience. So we were dealing with our technical issues at the beginning. And if not, I think we might be able to go ahead and move on. Once again, I'll look to Patrick and Clint real quick. If any thoughts, comments on what you're seeing in the chat.
No, I think that the chat comments are we're kind of receiving them and we're sensitive to that, and I think that's kind of one of the ways in which we the feedback is consistent with what we're trying to do, even engaging in this process here today, is to try and engage in a more open, more informal, and earlier in the process engagement with stakeholders. And I see a couple of Bruce's comments, and certainly they're seem to be very specific to the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. But I think they represent concepts that I think we're considering on a broad scale too, in terms of looking at cost of compliance and looking at ways of seeing if we can rely on other areas to take some of the load off of the regional board and really kind of focus on the areas where we see problems. So I think those comments are absolutely well received. I'll voice that, particularly for some of the issues like the additional engagement and things like that, it definitely is something that we discuss with the board. There's certainly trade-offs. If we want to engage in a lot more process, that means we will get less permits done. And so there are obviously kind of trade-offs one way versus the other way. We have a limited number of staff. If we scope up, the fees go up. So there's a lot of, it's like a very multi-ended balloon. You squeeze one end and the other end pops up. I think that's really, particularly for this agency, what we're getting at with the strategic planning process. What is the happy medium in the middle? And that's really what we're trying to calibrate our efforts to right now.
That's great. Well, I would have them vote on whether or not to raise fees, but we probably can, ignore that one. So let's go. I think it's a good time to maybe transition. Do you want to go ahead and take the next topic, Rebecca?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Rebecca Sami, and I am a staff geologist in our Fresno office. Next slide, please, Jean. Thank you. So the topic I'm introducing today is topic 2, addressing the concerns of underserved and underrepresented communities. For this topic, we'd like to learn what you think is working with how we serve and engage these communities and how we can improve. Staff at the Waterboard want to be sure that we are serving the public equitably, regardless of which communities our stakeholders come from. Next slide.
Rebecca, you may benefit from not doing your video.
Oh, am I cutting out a little bit?
Just slightly, not a problem.
Okay. Yeah, that happens. Sorry. Okay. So when prompted, about 20% of our respondents identified as being from disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged communities. Also, about 50% of the respondents said they did not know whether or not they were from a disadvantaged community. Those results indicate that a significant portion of the people we serve identify as being from or potentially being from a disadvantaged community. Also, close to 50% of the environmental justice community respondents thought that the following should be priorities or essential to our work: allocating more resources to enforcement, addressing the impacts of climate change and drought, developing ways to more effectively address the needs of the environmental justice community, allocating more resources to preserving the Delta's water quality, and many respondents thought that we should prioritize homeless encampments and the associated water quality issues. In addition to choosing these as priorities, several people submitted written responses indicating that they'd like us to work harder at addressing the needs of the underserved. Written responses included suggestions such as, please provide more resources to decentralized communities and disadvantaged communities, and provide safe and affordable drinking water to disadvantaged communities. Next slide. We asked survey respondents what they thought we were doing well and what they thought we were not doing well. Things we were told we were doing well include communication, protecting water quality, running our programs, and being transparent in our work. However, engagement was identified as something we were both doing well at and an area where we need improvement. Clearly, respondents are having a wide range of experiences when it comes to interacting with board staff. Okay, next slide, and I'm going to hand it off to Lisa.
That's great. Thank you. So to the group, what we'd like to find out from you is based on your experiences working with water quality issues in underserved and underrepresented communities. What's working well? What can be improved? We wanted to get a little better understanding of the survey feedback. And then added to that, what are the most important issues that the board should consider as they relate to the underserved or underrepresented communities? So we'll do the same thing as we did last time. We'll go ahead and give you a minute or two to think about this. Go ahead and use the chat. And if anyone is feeling comfortable to raise a hand and jump in, we'd appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and spend another probably 10 or so minutes on this particular topic. So with that, I'll go ahead and wait and let people add into this. For me, one of the interesting findings was just that people weren't even sure whether or not they were part of that community. There was the fact that was an easy question to answer. I thought was an interesting piece of information. And in fact, Jean, why don't we go back up to that slide?
I see Eric raising his hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric. Thank you. And Eric, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Which slide, Lisa?
The one just before, thank you. The one before this one, 23, there we go.
Thank you, Lisa. I apologize for the delay. I was having a little bit of an issue unmuting, but thank you for unmuting my mic. Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Oriana. I'm a policy advocate with Community Water Center, and we have extensive experience working with severely DAC communities and also DAC communities. And I just wanted to comment really quickly. We were not able to submit any response for the survey, but I think one of a crucial aspect in which the board can really work and help engagement. I saw that engagement was one of the issues that some other respondents thought that the board could improve on, and that is by engaging DAC communities. I think one really important component of that is ensuring that any webinar, any action being taken by the board is available to monolingual Spanish speakers. I appreciated that the webinar today had a Spanish agenda, but it was a little bit difficult for me to see if there was any availability in terms of Spanish speaking presentation available. So I think that that's possibly somewhere where moving forward, the board could really help engagement increase, especially with DAC communities who are often Spanish speaking individuals. Also, I think that that would really go well in line in terms of the internal vision that the board has where in fostering a culture of public engagement. And we just think that in order to foster that public engagement, expanding that as far as possible would really be beneficial to the board. I think another area where underrepresented communities could really see the board doing a lot more work in is also working to ensure that in the CV salts program that the early action plans from specific management zones are catering to the needs of these underrepresented communities. These underrepresented communities are often disproportionately impacted through different contaminants in their water. And so it would be great to see the board moving forward and being a strong advocate and having strong considerations for the needs of those communities. And so really appreciate the opportunity to chime in, and thank you all.
Yeah, Eric, in terms of the slide we've got up right now, the close to 50% respondents thought these were essential or high priority. Do you have any insight or comments about what people identified as priorities? And you're on mute again.
Apologize, my dog might be barking.
That's okay. I think that's kind of Zoom life right now. So we've seen little dogs, children's pets run through, and I was in a meeting yesterday. Someone was in their bedroom and a dog hopped up on the bed. So yeah, you're good.
Yeah, so I think the points that I made kind of address the second point in terms of the close to 50% of respondents. And then also, I think the third one that I think is really important to highlight is that due to the drought conditions that most of California is in right now, it's really important that as we move forward in terms of developing responses to drought, that we really take into consideration that often DAC communities and low-income communities are the most impacted by these conditions because they usually don't have either the resources to monetarily pay for solutions, but also some barriers exist in terms of they're not very aware of resources available from state agencies or local counties. And so as much as we can beef up these responses and ensure that there is valid communication with these community residents in the language they speak, but also that we're being mindful of that moving forward. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to chime in again, Lisa. It really helped.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you. It's helpful to just sort of understand. One of the goals that the team had here was really getting a little more richness when you have a survey like this and people are kind of checking boxes, but just that deeper conversation as they're building their strategic plan, how to articulate. Also, just like to know there's some terrific stuff being put up in the chat as well. And Patrick, do you feel comfortable just kind of noting what you're seeing in the chat?
Yeah, no, and I do want to say, Eric, it's good to meet you, and I think you're a relatively recent addition to Community Water Center, and with Jonathan heading, I think, to Washington, D.C., I know that Community Water Center consistently has, a really stellar people participating, so it's good to hear your voice and have you aboard. Absolutely, I think that when we talk about underrepresented communities, we certainly are talking about the communities that Eric is talking about, the disadvantaged communities, severely disadvantaged communities. I think we also are talking about other communities that are historically underrepresented in the board's discourse. And those include, a lot of small foothill communities. And I think Ms. Oman is representing. Those include tribal entities that we're increasing our outreach to. And so I certainly kind of see those as areas in which the board has to continue to exert itself to hear those positions, hear those opinions, and take those into account when we make our decisions. Certainly we've got a core of people who actively participate in the board meetings. We've heard, and I think Eric is kind of articulating this as well, that we are trying to reach out and trying to engage people in their communities, on their turf, and in their language. That includes Spanish. We do have Spanish translation available real time. We are also continuing to make efforts to have other languages available. Punjabi, Hmong are the two that we have the resources. If the need comes out there, we translate a lot of our environmental justice outreach, particularly that related to subsistence fishing, into those languages as well. And so it's all hands on deck, I think. And I think the social media on a certain level makes it easier, but on a certain level it raises the bar. You have to continue to meet people where they are, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's through digital media that's in their language. And I think that's what we've been doing quite a bit. I mentioned to JP, I think through a comment into the chat, that we have to increase our press presence. My response is actually, we met with the leadership group and the Office of Public Participation and the State Water Board has hired somebody who's a communications director, somebody who we have not had historically within our bigger water boards family, that is more than just press. Also talks about strategic communications and not just reacting to a story that says, oh, the board is doing something or not doing something, that we get affirmatively our presence out there. We talk about the sampling that we're doing. We talk about some of the programs that Lynn mentioned earlier that folks don't know a whole lot about, but do a huge amount of work to protect water quality in the valley. And I think that actually goes to stakeholders too. There's a lot of stakeholders that are spending billions of dollars on water quality control measures that are unheralded. And by the time the water comes to the tap, sometimes the reason why it is clean and pure is because of the efforts that were undertaken well up into the reaches of the watershed, or at the agricultural level, or at the industrial level, or in foothill communities communities for their upgrades for POTWs. And I think those stories have to get out there. I mean, those are taxpayers, ratepayers, and fee payers that are paying for that. And I think those stories need to be told, as well as the downsides. I think the issue of 900,000 Californians being without a source of safe, clean, and affordable water is something that has gotten a lot of attention, and is certainly something that we will continue to work on as we move forward. Yeah, I'm going to have Geneva jump in, and I hope I said that correctly. And she's talking a little bit, and this is interesting for me anyway. Your board is just so huge. I know I'm looking at Carl, your chair, the span and geography of it. So Geneva, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about the headwaters?
Yeah, I'm from up around the Mount Shasta area. So,
and I'm going to have you introduce yourself.
My name is Geneva Oman, from up near Mount Shasta, near the headwaters of the Sacramento River. And I'm a interested and concerned citizen, and I also am on the board of directors of a few nonprofits in our area who are concerned about water quality issues. So, we have issues here where our water is still, thankfully, quite clean. It's coming off of the mountain here, Mount Shasta, areas that are largely public lands and undeveloped, so that water coming off the mountain is still relatively clean and is providing a significant amount of water for downstream Sacramento River. And we want to keep it that way. I don't see the logic of allowing pollution of these waters so near the source that could only end up compromising use of those waters further downstream. There are anti-degradation policies, my understanding, that are supposed to keep these clean waters clean. And yet we have, companies coming in and where small communities, wastewater treatment plants can't handle their wastewater. So they're given permits for leach fields, and these leach fields, some of the ones around here or the proposed ones they're right in neighborhoods where people have wells. So there's the potential of contaminating those wells. In one case, there's a proposed leach field that is very close to a well that is a municipal water source. And we just don't see the logic of, permitting these kinds of leach fields when, the net result is likely to be further contamination of our water sources and resources here. And the logic is usually, well, it'll add some pollution to the groundwater, but it's still going to be below drinking water quality levels. And that's just not an appropriate logic for this area and to be consistent with anti-degradation policies.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things thank you, Geneva. One of the things I noticed about your comment, though, was talking a little bit about the rural context and how a lot of the source water areas are also underserved, and sometimes that gets lost in the larger conversation. So thank you for bringing that into the mix. Okay, well, I think we're actually kind of back on schedule again, and just want to say any last thoughts if anybody has chats. And thank you to Catherine and everyone for the comments. So with that, why don't we go ahead and Maxine, why don't we talk a little bit about climate change? This has been a really interesting one as we go to Maxine and the topic 3, climate change. One of the things that we talked about as we were preparing for this meeting was this really dramatic difference that we're noticing in surveying. And I'm saying this from the context of having done a lot of surveys statewide from different organizations, that people's awareness of this topic seems to be increasing, the sense of urgency, and the numbers are quite dramatic. I saw some surveys yesterday showing that the awareness of this on a national basis had increased by 31% over last year. That's stunning. So with that, I'll turn this over to Maxine to introduce the topic.
Thank you, Lisa. Next slide, please. So topic 3, as you can see, is climate change and drought. For this topic, we're looking for input on strategic options for assisting people, that is, stakeholders of all types across the whole region, and resources that are at risk from water quality impacts of climate change and drought. Next slide. So in response to the question that you've heard about earlier in this presentation about what water quality issues are the highest priority for the Central Valley Water Board to address in the next 5 to 7 years, climate change and drought impacts were at the top, along with long-term salinity management. Knowing that water supply and water quality issues are often inseparable, we understand the close coupling of concerns with climate change, drought, and salinity management in the region. Next slide. Here's a small sampling of survey comments associated with climate change and drought. I won't read them to you, but to summarize, the comments mainly focused on climate change impacts to water quality and availability, and on climate change planning. So we anticipate a variety of climate-related issues will continue to be a factor in the quality of life and health for everyone in the region, and may affect some stakeholders more dramatically than others. We'd like to get your feedback on this topic. Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. And then Maxine, before we leave, tell me, you dug into the survey data a little bit. So in terms of what the board is not doing well, and people kind of raised that, did you have any insight about what that might be about, or was there something you hope people focused on when they gave us the feedback?
No, and the main thing, it seemed that as is shown on this slide, it was very broad about what the water board is not doing well with respect to climate change. There weren't a lot of specifics. There was concerns definitely of water availability, and those were the main sort of things, but it was an undefined responses as far as I could see. I mean, as you can see on this slide, there's the scarcity of water and is an issue, but also with the awareness that the Central Valley Water Board cannot just make water appear, and we're that's outside of our purview and our abilities, but we can work to impact or have positive impacts on water quality and implementation of anti-degradation policies. So I think, but that's a good question, because we want to know more. We want to know what is important to the stakeholders and what people's visions are for what the board might be able to do. And by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm in the the Rancho Cordova office.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Maxine. I think that really pulls into play as well what Patrick said at the very, very beginning of the meeting about just the fact that there are all these other agencies and the way everything has to work together. Heidi, go ahead and jump in. Let me see if I can get you unmuted. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Good morning. My name is Heidi Oriel, and I'm a civil engineer in the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Group at Regional SAN, which is the largest POTW in the Central Valley region.
And that acronym means what?
I'm sorry?
What does that
Regional
acronym?
SAN is short for the Sacramento County Regional Sanitation District.
And POTW?
Is Publicly Owned Treatment Works, wastewater treatment plant. Thank you. One of the things that the board has really done a great job at, and that we'd like to see continue with regard to drought and climate change, is support for recycled water programs. Recycled water can support a number of resiliency goals for our region, and it's something that, you know, brings together that water sustainability aspect with water quality. And so we really appreciate the partnership that we've seen so far with the regional board on permitting for recycled water programs, but you know, ensuring that progress forward in making sure that permitting requirements can accommodate recycled water programs while protecting water quality in the region is essential to be able to develop that sustainable resource.
That's great. Thank you, Heidi. And we're going to go ahead and do as we've been doing in all the other questions, if we could have people add some things to chat. And I'll have you go to the next slide, just the formal question on our slide deck. Thank you. And if anyone else would like to hop in while we're thinking about this. And once again, remember where this is going to land. This is going to help inform the strategic plan for the board. And if they're going to be strategic, what kinds of things can they be doing? And we'd also like to know a little bit more about what you're doing. So we have a question here about how are you planning for the changes that will be brought about by climate change? Heidi started that really nicely for us. And then what would a more robust climate change policy for the board include? So let's go ahead and open mics and have people put some chat in for us, please.
I might just offer, Lisa, while folks are thinking about a response, oftentimes from the Waterboard's perspective, we kind of look at climate change in, let's say, a couple of different areas. One, where we're looking at those kind of mechanical things that we can do to mitigate the effects of climate change. So in the context of, a lot of our discharges to land program, where a facility is creating a waste stream and they're running it through some sort of a treatment system and discharging it to land. In that context, it might be, increasing, the height of their berms to allow for, more freeboard as a safety margin for the overtopping of those in response to climate change. It could be something that simple, right? And the other context is Heidi was kind of getting at, there's sort of these longer term things that we need to be considering. And, oftentimes that can be, things like the lack of dilution or available dilution to bring in as part of a permitting solution. And so, wastewater treatment plants are often faced with that. The agricultural community is also faced with that, not necessarily, but sometimes from a surface water perspective, but also from a groundwater perspective, without having the opportunity or ability to, in some cases, blend maybe saltier water with fresher water to reduce the salt content to apply to their crops, that can create challenges. And so I think for this particular slide, we're really encouraging, the participants to really think broadly, not just in some of those institutional fixes that the board should be considering as we regulate facilities or we develop new policies or permits, but also longer term planning, and kind of gets to the goal of strategic planning. What types of things should we be thinking about over the next 5 to 7 years that we can develop internally, or that we should be thinking about when we're engaging with the regulated community? And so I just kind of offer that as maybe an opportunity to think a little bit about the wide range of this topic, and really that we are looking for any and all ideas, concerns, feedback that participants may have regarding this subject.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed Bruce has made a few comments in the chat, but this first question is something that everyone should be able to answer, was how are you planning for the changes that are going to be brought about? What's going on with you? And then, how does that relate to us? And I would hope actually everybody in this conversation would be able to add something to that. So thank you, Bruce, for getting us started on this one. But like I said, I'm going to be a little bit patient here and ask people to stretch a little bit and give us some feedback on what you're doing. And if you'd like to talk, that's great. If you'd rather use the chat.
Maybe we could ask Bruce to expand on that a little bit. I think there's some good ideas in that. There's a last remark, if you don't mind, Bruce.
Don't mean to put you on the spot, Bruce. Are you good with jumping in?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And we have a number of our growers who are very proactive, multi-generational growers that are also participating in the call today. So I'd encourage them to raise their hand at the appropriate time. But I think, you know, I'll put it directly. You know, I'm trying to put it constructively as well. You know, that these processes, I mean, you take the irrigated lands program, which, well, you take the timber program, they're complex. They spread across, you know, different geographic regions, and one size doesn't fit all. What my chat comments are intended to reflect is oftentimes either through commodity groups, through designations of certified organic, through fish-friendly farming, through use of commonly and well-vetted management practices that have been advanced by the NRCS, by the Resource Conservation District. There is protection of surface and groundwater quality that expands beyond just not the agricultural footprint, but to the entire ecosystem. And so somehow that recognition versus regulation, boy, we sure would love to see that acknowledged. And others do it as well. Other dischargers do it as well, whether it's food processors, whether it's dairy. I know JP's on the call, and JP, as an old journalist, I'm glad to hear he advocated for more communication, because I think that helps folks understand what's being done and find the convergence of collaboration that we can move forward, so we don't spend countless hours and resources and dollars to find out, oh, we've already been doing it. We've already had the success that we're trying to measure right now. So I hope that made some sense, but that's what I was trying to get to. I know, if you're a fifth generation farmer in the Sacramento Valley, generations 1, 2, 3, and 4 made sure that you could be still there. And I think that's an important thing to recognize.
Great, thank you. So Jay Kipps, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and talking with us a little bit more, I'd appreciate that. And I saw you unmute just a second ago. Did I lose you? So you've added some things.
Am I there?
Yes, you are.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
My name is Joanne Kipps, and I'm a private citizen, retired senior water resource control engineer from the Fresno office. I've been retired for about 10 years now. But I keep abreast of what the regional board's doing, and so there we are.
And so some of your comments then were I'm just reflecting on what you've added. So about a robust climate change policy should include optimum groundwater water bank recharge locations.
Yeah, because it seems to me that it would be a good idea, if not for the regional board, or maybe in tandem with all these groundwater management plans that are being developed everywhere, to try to identify these locations. And because these are going to be crucial in managing California's water supply in the future. And it would be a good idea if we could try to preserve the quality of the groundwater in those areas as much as possible, so that they could serve our population in terms of drought. And that's my idea.
Yeah, well, thank you. And what a nice testament that you're retired and you're still calling in. That's a pretty nice statement about your own commitment and the organization.
Well, I imagine staff might disagree and management might disagree, but I strive to submit comments. I strive to submit comments that would improve waste discharge requirements for their effectiveness and consistency between offices and dischargers, and especially for staff, to ensure that they don't spend an inordinate amount of time trying to ensure that they're complying, the compliance and enforcement. So that's my objective. And
Thank you. Have you been following the work that's been done on Floodmore? Is that something you've been tracking?
No, I'm not familiar with the term, but I'm just starting to get dabbling in CV salts.
Yeah,
that big can of worms.
good to see you on, Joanne. Lisa, for everybody's information, Joanne keeps us honest. She was a diligent member of the Fresno office for many years, and I think brings a very respected opinion to the board. So I for one, I think the rest of the management team, we welcome your comments on all the items that you do show up to, and your participation is great. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think we are talking with DWR and CDFA on the Floodmar project, and I think that is an inkling that some folks have had too. And Floodmar, just to kind of untangle the alphabet soup, managed aquifer recharge. And I think that's one of the things that Floodmar is looking at, is trying to talk about what areas should be protected because they're prime recharge areas, either because of soil conditions, because of existing water quality. This is an area where if you dump a bunch of fresh water on it, it won't drive things like nitrate pollution or others to the groundwater table. This is optimal recharge area for a variety of reasons. I think we have to broaden the conversation and understand what we can do with our basin plans as to protect those areas and potentially even enhance protection of those areas. So I think that's a very cool idea there.
Great, thank you. I noticed there's been a little bit of back and forth also in the chat about beneficial use and how that might relate to climate change. Any thoughts on that?
I love how people are not shy in the chat, because we will certainly be encapsulating this. Debbie, absolutely. I know in conversations with the State Water Board, whereas they tend to see that a lot of the conversation around climate change and adaptation is in the coastal areas. I continually beat the drum to let folks know that POTWs are caught between a rock and a hard place. You have increased water conservation, and then in times of a drought, you switch your surface water supplies, or the community switches their surface water supplies to groundwater supplies, which tend to be higher in salinity, and you've got a double whammy on your hand. I think we, certainly through the CV Salts project, we'll work on refining the drought and conservation policy. But I think a lot of those conversations are ongoing. And I know we strive to make those issues known to the rest of the state as a whole.
Great, thank you.
I will say,
oh, please.
I was just going to say too, this is really a broad topic, and in Patrick's introduction to today's meeting, he talked a little bit about sort of the differences between the State Water Board and the regional boards, and under the Cal EPA umbrella, and then the Department of Water Resources under the CNRA umbrella. This is a very broad and global issue on the forefront of the governor's agenda, and I would imagine folks have seen it. For those who have not, in 2020, the governor issued an executive order that resulted in the development of water resilience portfolio. And the water boards participated heavily in the development of that portfolio, as did the California Department of Water Resources under CNRA and a number of other agencies. But it really does kind of lay out, I think, in a real good format, a lot of the issues that the state is facing as it relates to climate change. And in addition to that, what the agencies will be doing to address some of those concerns. And I think, not just for the public's benefit, but, if you have ideas from that, we will also, be considering some of those ideas as we develop the board strategic plan. So I just want to make sure that folks are aware that there's a lot of multi-agency collaboration in this arena. There's certainly some pieces that, the board can do and is squarely within, our purview and our authority, but a lot of that is interactive and will require coordination with other agencies.
Lisa, this is Carl. I'd like to make a couple of comments.
Oh, please do.
First of all, folks in the chat, tremendous amount of good dialogue there that that's going to have to be considered very seriously as we go forward and be the subject of much conversation. Geneva talked about upper watersheds, and I have to agree with her. The picture I have behind me is the Big Arroyo, a beautiful stream in the upper Sierra, not far from Whitney, which feeds the Kern River. And it just past experiences there have shown that you have to be very careful in the kinds of activities you carry out in that area to protect those waters. That really, I think, that comment pertains to all of the watersheds. Upper watersheds, and I have to concur with Geneva. I also might point out, and I say this with a bit of tongue in cheek, I got a side message from Danny Merkley telling me that I needed a coat. My background there. Thank you, Danny.
Yeah. I want you to know Danny Merkley's been sending me notes too.
Okay. But going back to the comments, Bruce's comments and the comments of others, Debbie's and others, certainly are going to be a rich source to pull from as we go forward in this effort. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm really struck. There's so much here. Mark, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Carl touched on what I was impressed by here is how much input we're getting. I don't want to jump the shark, but this is one of the more productive Zoom calls I've ever been on so far. And I would just add, in terms of the headwaters, the board does have programs for mines and forest management. I think those are largely reactive programs. Unfortunately, they're very difficult to fund, especially on the mines. And the forest management has been largely reactive on the board's front, unfortunately, even though the fires tend to be kind of the headline that's tied to climate change year after year here in California. And I think I would let Clint address this, but I think a little more proactive approach might be possible to look at forest management planning in some of the critical headwater areas and prioritizing brush clearing and removing undergrowth in some of those areas before other forestry that might be closer to population centers. I think Clint has also pointed out probably the greatest challenges that the state of California faces are not only climate change, but the increasing population and the tendency to push population into those borderlands that are subject to fires. So I'd like Clint maybe comment on that, but those are just my observations related to the headwaters, and I agree it's a very important topic.
Thank you. I'll make notice also, John Buckley was on the call with us a little bit earlier, and he sent a note and said he had to hop off. He apologized. I was really hoping he'd be here for this part of the conversation, but Clint, take it away.
Yeah, I hear you. There have been a lot of changes throughout the state in just the last year. And I think really gained a lot of steam since the 2018 wildfires with regard to forest health initiatives. Most recently, the Waterboards contributed to development of the governor's forest and wildfire resilience action plan. It's a very long list of very ambitious goals and objectives that get at both the proactive side and the reactive side of wildfire and veg management activity throughout California. We've been heavily engaged in that in the last couple of months, trying to develop a new Waterboard strategy to engage with the other agencies as that particular plan begins to roll out. It's intended that that plan really going to serve as the framework for the $1 billion that's being proposed in the governor's budget, as sort of that list of activities that begin to occur. Some of the activities that are goals that are outlined in that wildfire and forest resilience action plan are strategic in nature. Statewide forest restoration strategy. Strategies for federal lands. There restoration strategies, things on that reactive side, and then on the proactive side, a whole bunch of grant funding, coordination, cooperation, and kind of tee up to proactive side of veg management. But I agree wholeheartedly with you. It's been a long time coming, and fortunately, it's taken some pretty catastrophic wildfires over the last couple of years, I think, to get the attention of a lot of people. That attention, I think, has culminated in a solid plan. And I think the agencies over the next few months and the next couple of years will be devoting a lot of resources to building out that plan so that we're more effective moving forward. To get to the headwaters piece in particular, Assembly Bill 2551, which was passed a couple of years ago, called for the CNRA and Cal EPA may engage in a couple of projects, one of which is to develop kind of a multi-benefit project and accompanying strategy that really gets at understanding the characteristics of our headwaters in terms of veg management. And then once we have that firm understanding, be able to develop a strategy that allows us to move in and better those conditions and to be able to maintain those conditions once they're bettered. A lot of the challenges we've had in the past is that there are grant funds to say conduct a thinning project, but once those grant funds are exhausted, there isn't necessarily a mechanism to continue to maintain that particular watershed in that sort of preferred state. And so a lot of what I think the Forest and Wildfire Resilience Action Plan, in addition to the project under 2551, really try to get at is not just understanding, but how do we go in and do the work, and then how do we maintain it in the long run. But I hear you wholeheartedly, and it's certainly something that we're pouring a lot of attention into as we speak.
Yeah, thank you, Clint.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Well, we've got a couple things that we need to do next. One of them is we're going to do something similar to baseball, which is to make sure we have a 7th inning stretch. I think right now in Zoom world, there's just a certain point when we all just need to stand up and stretch and maybe run and get a cup of coffee or something like that. So what I'm going to do is ask Jean and Bob to help me to, if you wouldn't mind putting up a 7-minute timer, so people would know how much longer it is, until the end of the break. Is that something that you're able to do, Bob and Jean? To put up a timer for us?
Perhaps not a timer, but I think they can put up a "we'll be back at."
We'll be back
message.
at.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I know you guys sometimes have a little clock thing that runs, but yeah. Why don't we do a? We will be back at. Let's go ahead and go with 10:42, and we really want you to take a break. We'll leave the chat open. If you, oh my gosh, a lot of really great stuff has been coming in. So we'll leave that chat open, but I'm going to encourage everybody to turn off their video, stand up, stretch, run and get a cup of coffee, and then we'll be back at 10:42. So we'll see you then. Great, Patrick, we're back. So some of my meetings, I actually make somebody get up and like do yoga sort of things, and you know, but
that is something I may take up with the executive team. So Clinton, you got to limber up and get that mat in your office for next one.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing. And I won't do it in this meeting. Some other people have been subjected to me, you know, us singing some kind of a song, but you all don't know me well enough yet.
Next time. I will real quick before we begin again. Tam Dodek of the State Water Board, not to expose her too much, was listening in to some of the morning session, and she commented that some of the comments in the chat, they're not being seen through the YouTube channel. So to the extent that we can, I'll do it. Lisa, if you can do it as well. Read a couple out loud as we kind of move through the issues. I'll, if I could, you know, take the prerogative to read just a couple through. I know we're kind of starting at the relatively recent one. One of the ones that I think we talked about a little bit was Joanne Kipp, so I'll kind of start from there. We have Geneva commenting on the concept of beneficial use to be reevaluated, and really taking a harder look at what if export of water is really a beneficial use. We have Bruce Haddishell talking about how the Sacramento Valley believes in multi-benefits to protect aquatic life, drinking water, and agricultural supply. NorCalWater.org, Ngudu, please excuse the pronunciation there, talked about for a more robust climate change policy, the experiences of beneficial users such as small farmers who depend on shallow wells should be included, especially their experiences with previous drought years to inform future policies. And I will kind of jump ahead to Eric's comment, which is right along those lines. And he's with Community Water Center, who says, for us, climate change means that rural communities will have less drinking water available. We are looking for ways to ensure communities have vital drinking water resources in the face of climate change and exacerbated drought. It would be ideal for the Central Valley Water Board and others to synchronize resources and responses to ensure efficiency. And I responded to that quickly, also letting folks know that what we're doing is we're working with the GSAs and with DWR that have primary responsibility over that, because my comment is water supply quickly turns into a water quality issue in times of scarcity. A couple more comments. Ellen Weir talks about the cutting the green tape efforts. CNRA has been providing a lot of resources to do that. I think sustainable conservation has been also kind of caught up in some of those efforts. Got a comment. I know I'm skipping a few. We will save this and reproduce it as an appendix to a report to the board, either in April or in June. So everybody has an opportunity to see this, but this is just for the YouTube people out there today, letting you know what we've been talking about in the chat here. And certainly if you're interested, email RB5S-strategic plan, and we will give you the Zoom credentials even at this late stage if you want to kind of jump in and have some conversations on the chat. Lastly,
don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Not that many of you are, but feel free to join in on that. And I also we saw a couple of comments also from Ryan Flaherty, who I believe is with Sustainable Conservation there too, talking about opportunity to drive more state funding for climate change.
I think we lost you, Patrick.
Yeah, I think we did.
Just lost your audio. You're currently muted. Yep. Looks like you are muted, Patrick.
Yeah, no.
There we go.
My mic fails from time to time. It's Zoom issues with everybody here. Ryan Flaherty, oh, still getting me?
We are.
All right.
Yeah.
Ryan Flaherty made a comment about limited resources driving into climate change to water quality issues. You betcha. We're making the pitch very regularly that we need more resources to the extent that we can to address the things like water recycling projects, to address things like managed aquifer recharge and things that will be part of the governor's water quality portfolio or governor's water portfolio and the water quality aspects of that. I think that's really the platform for a lot of the discussions and a lot of the engagements. And I think that will continue to be so for the years to come. So just wanted to kind of summarize that and took a few minutes aside. Again, asked for the credentials. One other thing I posted in the chat, we've got a copy of the presentation in PDF form that we can share with anybody who requests it. We have some ADA loopholes to jump through or barriers to jump through where we can't post everything online. And so, but upon request, we can make them available to you. We try and make all of our materials to the extent we're able, ADA compliant, but some of the presentations are a little trickier to do that, particularly when they involve outside groups and multiple different formatting things. But we will certainly make that available upon request. And if you are part of a community that needs ADA accessibility requirements, just contact us and we will figure out the best way to meet your needs for any document that is not online. We've also had some flags up there about ADA compliance and what we do with the historic documents, whether we should make more available. We have contractors working on remediating some of the most relevant documents. Continue to ask us for documents. I know it's such a challenge. You can't ask for what you don't know is there. I think that's one of the big losses. I will say that it is a governor's priority. It is a legislative priority to have everything ADA accessible. We're adapting to that as best we can. Obviously, it can take, to be quite honest, it can take literally dozens of hours to remediate a single permit. And we just are doing the best we can under the circumstances that we have available to us. But just summarizing some of the comments out there for the folks that may be on YouTube.
Thank you so much. And that's actually not something I was aware of. So thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. All right. Well, I think we're probably ready. I'll check in with Carl and Mark real quick if there's anything that you'd like to say before we launch into the second part. So what we're going to cover next is the cost of compliance and ways of addressing that. We're going to talk about rethinking approaches to special water quality concerns and homeless encampments, which was the topic that came up. And then the last topic is life post-COVID. What are people thinking about engagement? What kind of methods or approaches would you like to see going forward? So I'll just check with Mark and Mark, do you want to jump in real quick before we hop into the next round?
I'm enjoying this. Just keep the ball rolling, I think.
Okay, very good. Carl?
My comment would be the same. I think the whole issue on climate change is one of the most difficult topics in the world, wherever you are, to try to get your arms around. And I think it's important that we continue to pursue this. Going back to CV salts just for a moment, thought's been on my mind. Some of the comments that have been made pertain to this. One of the alternatives on CV salts is to move that up to 7 million tons of salt a year that come into this valley out to the sea in a brine stream. That's an awful lot of water. And when we talk about water reclamation, that water is oftentimes of a better quality than the water we're desaling at some of the water treatment plants on the coast. So I think we have to look in the years coming ahead on how we can be better, much better at reclaiming water from the wastewaters that we have and putting them to good use in this valley. Doing that economically is the real challenge, but I happen to work primarily today in the research area of how to reclaim those waters, and I know that a lot of exciting things are on the horizon. We just have to persevere. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know it was Heidi brought a little bit of that in her earlier comments. I think we're ready to go to the next topic. And I know we've got Jonathan in queue. So Jonathan, why don't you hop in and introduce us to the next topic?
Absolutely. Morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Muir, I'm an engineering geologist in the Rancho Cordova office. Topic 4 is considering the cost of compliance, strategic options, and methods for addressing costs. Next slide, please. So within the survey, we received several comments regarding cost of compliance and the need for it to hopefully come down, specifically from small landowners and businesses. Of the 326 respondents, 55% rated working to reduce the cost of compliance for permittees as a high or essential priority. Sorting through the data, if you weed out our internal responses from external stakeholders, that was the #1 priority with 77.5% of permittees. Next slide, please. That brings us directly into our cost questions, to which I'll pass it back to Lisa.
Thank you. So one of the things that you learned from the survey results was people not really completely understanding what was feeding into the costs. So when you talk about ways to reduce them, what they should be evaluating related to that. And then the second thing that we wanted to hear more about, so people said they didn't like this, but we did want to understand what people thought could be done to make the change. So we'd like to open the question and answer to everyone. And I already got people hopping in on this one. This was an area where they're pretty comfortable talking. So what additional information would you need to increase your confidence in the cost structure? And what could the board be doing to keep the cost down for you? And I'll look for hands. And I will go ahead. I once again see people in the chat. Ellen, go ahead and we'll get you unmuted here. And go ahead and hop in and go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thanks for taking my comments. I'm Ellen Weir, General Counsel for Grassland Water District, and we provide water to managed wetlands in the grassland ecological area. We've been working with the board over the last few years to talk about an alternative or more comprehensive regulatory framework for managed wetlands in the Central Valley. There are hundreds of thousands of acres of managed wetlands that face a number of regulatory compliance challenges, including those of the regional board. I think because we're managed as irrigated lands and now with CV salts, we are participants in that program. We also have a very robust water quality monitoring program and provide a lot of data to board staff. We managed to bypass drainage, agricultural stormwater around our wetlands to maintain water quality. We've, formed our own SGMA agency, and there's just a number of different compliance requirements that we don't always have the bandwidth or the time or the budget to afford to be intimately involved with or to keep up, so to speak. So I think one item that the strategic plan could address is the regional board's role in trying to facilitate some sort of specific compliance program or different ideas for trying to help us stay in compliance and keep our costs down. We pay, I think, $70,000 just my district alone for the irrigated lands program. We provide all that data about our water quality. And, I think that there has been some movement in the past, but maybe like us, the board doesn't necessarily have the staff or the bandwidth to address this in a holistic way. And I think it could be a really valuable thing for the boards to move toward a specific policies for managed wetlands that help us stay in the business of protecting the environment and improving water quality.
Great, thank you so much, Ellen. Debbie, you're next in queue.
Hi, good morning. My name is Debbie Webster. I'm with the Central Valley Clean Water Association and really have appreciated the discussion so far that's been going on. For me, when I look at the cost of compliance, I also look at, there's two aspects, and some of them have already been talked about, is looking at how together through regional solutions, we can improve water quality and and public health, but do it at a more reasonable cost by working together for solutions. Because I represent a lot of point sources, sometimes it becomes very expensive to do those improvements right at the point of discharge, but there's other ways to actually improve water quality more or provide those beneficial use protections. And I want to say is I think that this board has been very good at trying to do this. It's just one of those tools and some of the other regulatory tools that could help more with that. And then also being a little more thoughtful. One of the things, a little bit more thoughtful as we look at our basin planning and basin planning options. One of the things that has really driven costs up, and I know that it's frustrating for both board staff and for a lot of our community, is that these blanket applications are how the basin plan gets interpreted, so that you're not necessarily you're not necessarily able to connect a use to what's being required because there was a blanket interpretation or a very conservative one that's not that site specific. And that whole basin planning process either adds cost on the regulatory end or on the implementation end, or on even the regulatory end, just to get it right. And so that's an area where I think needs to be explored more.
Thank you. Let's go ahead to E. Sills, and I'll have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ed Sills. I farm in Sutter County. I've been president of the Placer, Nevada, South Sutter, North Sacramento subwatershed for a number of years. And my comments on cost are primarily general. And I have a couple of principles that I think should guide our regulation. And the first one is that the cost and burden of regulation should be commensurate to the amount of risk, that is the probability and the extent of the potential damage to the environment. So I think that's, I think one of the problems with regulation is that takes, you might say, to manage that principle, it takes maybe more time and effort by the regulators. The second general principle would be that the proposed regulation should have minimal negative consequences. And one of those negative consequences in our area was that small growers, a lot of them quit farming due to the cost and time burden associated with the regulations. And we had quite a few of those in Placer County. So that's an issue that might be addressed by some kind of minimum acreage or some other mechanism. And, you know, the other thing, these unintended consequences, you know, regulation in some cases generally causes many small businesses to quit or fail due to insufficient returns over investment created by those regulatory costs, while larger entities and corporations can afford to pay for those. And this is counterproductive to a fair and productive free market where consumers have many choices among a diverse set of producers. So, you know, in the case of farmers and agricultural producers, looking historically, the number of farmers has decreased drastically over the last 100 years probably, and it continues to do so for many reasons. But we don't want the government regulation to exacerbate that trend. And thirdly, if we can fine tune the regulations to the risk, as I started to talk about in first. For example, the northern Sacramento Valley is much different than the San Joaquin Valley. The hydrology, geology, amount of rain, and snow received annually make it a much different environment. So that the risk of many of the problems we are addressing, such as salinity, nitrogen leaching into the groundwater, and overdrafting, are much less occurring in the northern Sacramento Valley than occur in the southern San Joaquin. And lastly, I wonder about the effect that we presently work in a political environment in which competing sides have, you might say, completely different worldviews. And does that inhibit our ability to solve these problems? This is not necessarily showing itself in the board or the staff, but is the larger population putting pressures where it inhibits our ability to have solutions? So what can we do to make sure that this is minimized, I think, is to we make sure that we are all listening to each other, that we have mutual respect for each other's point of view, and we see goodwill on each other's part as a default condition. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. It sounds like maybe you've jotted a few of those things down to help you organize your thinking. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, would you mind putting that in the chat also?
Sure.
That was I could tell that was such a thoughtful response. I wanted to honor what Patrick mentioned about the folks that are monitoring online with us on YouTube. Megan is helping me. She's the online facilitator. So Megan, would you mind just doing a real quick summary of what you're seeing in the chat? And then I want to go to Heidi next. I'll also let the group know I'm letting this item run over a little bit. This is clearly a priority to the group. I'll steal a little bit of time from some of the other two items to do that. So Megan, go ahead and take it away.
Sure. So I'm going to go ahead and summarize some of the comments. If I missed an important piece, please feel free to add that in. But we are seeing some comments about how the cost of compliance is also just, it's a large factor that takes into consideration that time that people invest as well. It's not just dollars paid. We're seeing discussion about how there are differences in where the money is coming from, where the fees might exceed the cost of service. So other regions of the state not paying as much as Region 5. And then also discussion about how to prioritize programs and resources. And that becomes more difficult when there are more evolving issues which add to costs, like CECs, which I'm not sure what that acronym stands for. So Karen, if you want to jump in what that is, but then also just discussing also de minimis users and what priority they have as well. So I think that captures the comments that we've seen thus far.
Thank you. Constituents of emerging concern. I think that's always a hazard of being a water person. We don't actually speak regular language, so we have to watch that. Heidi, hop in. And we'll have you unmute yourself. And if you wouldn't mind just reintroducing yourself. Yep, still on. There she is.
Thank you. It wouldn't let me unmute myself. Again, I'm Heidi Oriel with Regional SAN. We are a wastewater treatment plant located near Elk Grove, and we provide wastewater treatment services for about 1.6 million people within Sacramento and Yolo counties. I wanted to build on the previous comments that were very thoughtful, the principles for regulation and the thought about unintended consequences, which is such a difficult thing to grapple with, particularly when the regional board, has a particular role in protecting water quality. And there's a lot of challenges there with working with other agencies and trying to understand the larger impacts of what regulations might do. But one of the suggestions that Regional SAN entered into the survey was an idea of perhaps increasing staff field training. And this is something that I realize is not a small challenge because it takes time. Region 5 is very large geographically. We've got current challenges of COVID with getting out and meeting with people, but I think as far as a long-term implementation, having better connection, not just through these stakeholder processes, but also in getting regional board staff out to see what permittees do, visiting the wastewater treatment plants, which I know you do, but connecting with those agencies, visiting the ag permittees, visiting the managed wetlands, and really seeing what the day-to-day struggles are of these permittees, and also seeing the day-to-day benefit that each of these permitted entities brings to the environment and to our state as a whole, that I think that could really help build that connection and understand costs of compliance and potentially those unseen costs of how different regulations can affect different sectors.
Great. Thank you so much, Heidi. And I am going to be mindful of time. I just want to check in real quick with Patrick or Clint if any observations, thoughts. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, no, I think it's I think that certainly Heidi's comment to get out in the field more. Our staff love doing that. I think we have managers that try and make it a priority to get folks out into the field to understand the dynamics of their discharge. We even drag along some state board folks from time to time to make sure that they are aware of the issues that we regulate. So that's absolutely a big part of what we can and should be doing. I think, my philosophy, Mr. Sills, I absolutely kind of espouse that as well. I think, and I try and find the middle ground between your comments and the comments of Joanne Kipps, who points out, quite right, that discharging in the Central Valley is a privilege, not a right. But I think that within that context, the water boards have to figure out how to best tailor the obligations that we impose upon dischargers with the risk to water quality. We try and do that quite a bit, to be quite frank. I think that there's some of the Bruce's comments, there's a lot of efforts that have been underway in the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program to lighten the burden for dischargers in the North Valley. They certainly are not subject to the same set of monitoring requirements that the dischargers in the South Valley are, but more can be done. I think we can have more productive conversations about tailoring all of our permits better to the water quality risk as we move forward. Because I think we understand very, very clearly, our staff understands very, very clearly that we are, as I mentioned earlier, a fee-driven agency. We, our salaries are not paid by the taxpayers for the most part. There's a small sliver that comes in from US EPA and a couple other resources. But for the most part, we exist because we charge fees. And I think we have a responsibility to be responsible stewards of those resources that are entrusted to us to protect water quality. And so we want to do it in as streamlined of a manner as possible, while still maintaining those protections for water quality. And I understand many times, the large fees, the big fee is the capital upgrade that needs to be made to a facility. But and I think a lot of times we don't have a lot of flexibility with respect to that, though there are time schedules and other things that we can look to. But I think within the confines of, as long as we're protecting beneficial uses, there's a lot of discretion that we can apply. And whether that takes the shape of really being a little more transparent about how we exercise that discretion, whether it's a resolution or a basin plan provision, I think those are all things that we can consider as part of the strategic planning effort. So I really, really want to thank everybody for their comments, both on the side of let's reduce costs, and also on the side of, well, but also remember that the ultimate obligation is to protect water quality. I would note that the way that the board reframed its strategic vision, its mission statement, wants to take into account a multi-generational perspective on things. I've heard environmental justice used a lot. I've heard equitable justice used a lot. There's also, and I think it comes into context with the climate change perspective, a concept that I've heard recently of generational justice, that we don't want to pollute in such a way that our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will not have the same opportunities to enjoy both the groundwater resources and the surface water resources that we currently enjoy today. We want to not only protect but also enhance and restore. So thank you for everyone for the comments on this. I think we've got a lot to chew on here. It's a super big issue. I know our survey revealed it's a high priority for many of you out there. So we're going to take that into account as we strategize for the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Patrick. I know when you and I talked about your strategic planning, one of the things that there's this sort of balance between taking the day-to-day work and then pulling it into the more aspirational kinds of comments. So when we talk about things like generational justice, that takes us into a space that really helps us be strategic. Ed, did you want to say something else before I hop off this topic? He's got his hand up, so.
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to put in my thoughts on the chat, and my chat is disabled. So I didn't know how to fix that.
Okay, well, we'll get you some info then, and there's an email too. Maybe we can drop that in the chat again. So
there we go. There we go. I'm good now. Okay, great. Thanks very much, and I appreciate it, Patrick, what you said.
Thank you for your comments.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, do you want to take us to the next topic? We'll go ahead and switch slides.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, welcome to topic 5, everyone. This is rethinking approaches to special water quality concerns, homeless encampments, and the goal of zero trash. Next slide, please. So within the survey, we had approximately 90% of respondents state that allocating more resources to address water quality concerns related to homeless encampments was a medium to essential priority. This is actually a photograph of a project area that we were involved in. Next slide, please. I apologize, by the way, I'm in a construction zone right now. If you hear hammering, there's construction happening right outside my window. At any rate, so where our authority lies with homeless encampments, there are a couple of avenues that we have to levers we can pull to address this issue. One is the multiple separate storm sewer system permit. Those of you that are familiar with it would know it as the MS4 permit. We have some enforcement levers, cleanup orders to property owners and managers that we can work with, and then collaborative efforts that we've been involved with. And one of those is the Steelhead Creek cleanup. You saw that pictured above. There were several other agencies that we collaborated with for that: the American River Flood Control Agency, the local reclamation district, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. And that project removed 120,000 pounds of trash from that waterway. But at the end of the day, there is limited leverage that we can apply, limited funding that we have for this particular issue. Next slide, please. So as far as the homeless issue and our role, I'll throw it back to Lisa again for some guided discussion.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll go ahead, if everyone remembers back in the beginning, Patrick put up that slide with the organizational alphabet pea soup. There's so many different organizations that work on this, and it's actually, the board's jurisdiction is a sliver of that. It's just a piece of that. And that was interesting to me when I learned a little bit more about that. So given that limited role, then where should the board be focusing its efforts? How can the board be supporting addressing some of this? And then what are some steps that potentially the board could take to affect long-term solutions? That's the questions. And then Patrick, if you wouldn't mind just really quickly just explaining to people about jurisdiction and why this is complicated for the board.
No, I think it's incredibly complicated. I think Jonathan got into it as well. We, as members of the community, like many of you, I think, when I bike into work or when I take a look at the local watershed. Trash and homelessness issues are endemic in the valley. And on one hand, we want to have incredible compassion for the individuals that wound up in that situation. We've had presentations to the board that show that those are not transients coming in from elsewhere. Those are members of our own communities. Of, here in Sacramento County, it is former Sacramento County residents that are living by the river. In Fresno County, it's Fresno residents. Those are members of our greater community who are living by the water. But they're also generating an incredible amount of trash. The encampments are polluting the waters, and efforts to remediate that pollution have stymied local governments as well as the water boards. There's a lot of constraints that they have on treating these individuals compassionately, and some of them under court order. They can and can't do certain things. The shelter capacity is at a minimum. And I think that we have to be respectful of the lines that are drawn in these particular circumstances. Work with local agencies, try and collaborate with them, but recognize that everybody is resource constrained when dealing with these individuals who have found themselves living by the river. And again, I totally understand, if there isn't shelter space, and I think when I walk by these individuals, my thoughts are there, but for the grace of God go I type of thing. These are individuals who have had circumstances that are tough to wrestle with as somebody who's in our position. But our society can be very cruel to those individuals. So threading those boundaries while maintaining our compassion and working towards water quality is a huge challenge for the board. So I think particularly with this issue, I want to keep it wide open for folks to present their thoughts on this, to present their concerns on this, because we're wrestling with it in the same way that many of the local communities are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for framing that a little bit more, because I think it's interesting. You did get a lot of survey feedback that people felt it was important, that there was a need to hop in some way, and also that there doesn't appear to be a lot of potential solutions. So I'm going to ask everyone to please just put your thinking caps on. I don't know if any of you are working on anything that might address this. If there are concepts or ideas, this is really a place where some input would be really helpful. I do see a little bit going on in the chat here. What are you seeing from Karen? Patrick, do you want to hop in with what you're seeing, or do you want Megan to read that?
Yeah, if Megan can read it and I can respond.
Yeah, go ahead, Megan, from Karen.
Sure. Karen's asking about the statewide trash amendments, and there was a conversation started about it, but that the state water board or another organization seemed to have lost traction with this, and said, can this cost-effective approach be revitalized?
Absolutely. And thanks for making that point, Karen. So this is, I was a strong advocate for this, kind of cross permitting approach. The concept for the folks that haven't worked on this is that many communities that operate what are called municipal separate storm sewer systems, or MS4s, which is many of the cities and towns in the valley, they operate these systems, have an obligation under their permit to clamp down on trash and install very expensive measures and to conduct very expensive street sweeping measures and things like that are absolutely appropriate for water quality protection. And the goal is full capture, so that the outfalls from your street sewer that clears the stormwater off the street and then discharges to the surface water does not have any trash in it. Minimizing trash there is a huge financial burden, but appropriately so for these municipalities. We've been approached by several municipalities in the region that have said, wait a second, I am spending millions and millions of dollars to try and eliminate that trash, but my outfall is feeding right into the American River, Sacramento River, or other watershed right next to a massive homeless encampment that is dumping tons of waste into the water body. So I'm reducing, a few bags of chips and some, other types of things that are falling into my storm sewer. I'm spending all this money on remediation of my system, installing concrete sumps and things like that. And meanwhile, this huge problem, why don't we have a conversation about dialing back my obligations under the MS4 permit and allowing me to kind of offset it with a more than equitable kind of harvesting of trash from these encampment sites and diverting money to doing that type of cleanup work. Unfortunately, at this juncture, the State Water Board hasn't been as receptive to that. I think there's certain anchor points that were tied to as part of statewide TMDL amendments that would require reopening strategies. But we continue at the regional board. I think Carl is a strong advocate. We've briefed him. We've briefed Board Member Bradford on this as well. We think it's a great idea. It's run into a bit of a risk and a bit of a challenge in getting this done at the State Water Board level. My sense is, just to be quite frank, is I understand where the State Water Board is on this. They made these commitments, and they made some of these commitments to many people as to how their policy would look. I think if this idea was introduced back when those trash amendments were being considered, it would absolutely be something that would be included in the policy. But at this stage, it would require a revision of the policy, is the answer that we've been getting to move that forward. So I certainly support efforts to lobby the State Board to free that up if that's an interest to you. But just recognize, if it was my agency and we had adopted a TMDL and spent a huge amount of resources and time, reopening it would be a challenge. That'd be a challenge in any respect. So, but the more we can present these type of fact situations to decision makers that govern that policy at the State Board, maybe it can get some traction. It's a great idea. It's one that's very complicated to execute. But it's a whole host of issues that we'd like to see happen. We'll see. I support it. I will say that.
We have Bruce and Karen have both been adding a little bit to the chat, and I'm going to just check in with both of them in a minute. But one of the things Bruce is talking about, of course, he works in an organization that represents a lot of other people, and also he's a Roseville City Council member. And so he's got a perspective directly as one of the cities that's having to respond to this. And then Karen, I was curious, I know you work across multiple jurisdictions. Is there anything going on that you're seeing other people doing, or any insights that you have just from the fact that you work across so many jurisdictions? So that's a question to Karen. And then Bruce, if there's anything else you want to add, we'll go to you.
There certainly are. Well, first of all,
I'm going to have you introduce yourself again real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry. Karen Ashby with Larry Walker Associates. Yeah, work with a number of different types of clients. So Patrick, first of all, I completely appreciate your comments, and I know that staff were working really collaboratively with the group, as Lisa Moretti mentioned, with the partnership and others, to look at how we might be able to merge these two programs, which are mutually beneficial. So I completely appreciate your comments, and think you summarized that really well. There definitely are other programs in the Bay Area. They have kind of a trash reduction effort, and there are TMDLs where they're structured a little bit differently than the trash amendments, and they do have these types of offset or kind of crediting types of efforts that recognize cleanups in the receiving water. So but they are outside of the trash amendments, which I think is where the rub is. But yeah, I don't know if there are ways that we can be creative. It seems like that's such a clear intersect between the programs that maybe we can continue to see if we can put our creative hats on and maybe work with the water board and figure out how we could, make these more cost effective. Like we were just talking about the cost of compliance, instead of adding yet another thing, how can we merge these efforts? So I think that hopefully Lisa answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. And then as mentioned, Bruce, I know as a city council member, you're bringing a slightly different perspective to this. Lisa Moretti, did you want to add anything to this comment or to the discussion? And if you would, we not quite seen. Okay, and you don't have to, obviously. Bruce, before I move on, anything else you want to add?
Sorry, I was just able to unmute myself. I
Yeah, go
apologize.
ahead. No, that's okay. Thank you, Lisa. Go ahead. Go ahead
No.
and introduce yourself again, please.
Hi, I am Lisa Moretti. I'm with the Sacramento Stormwater Quality Partnership, and I work at the City of Sacramento Department of Utilities. And I just want to echo, thank you, Patrick. Rich Mule has been working with us consistently and observe the fact that we have significant trash problems in our receiving water. But as a municipality within our permits, we have to spend our money to stay in regulatory compliance. And that means that the resources, the limited resources that we have, will now have to stay and focusing on what we believe is a smaller source of trash, which is from that just enters from our streets and goes out of our pipe. And one thing I saw was that Rich really tried to work with a broad stakeholder group. And what we found is that in water bodies, when you have maybe the base of the river responsible by DWR and the sides by flood control districts, and maybe the top of the levees by something else, is how do you bring all those stakeholders together to solve these complex problems? And it was not an easy process, because there is not one agency that is responsible for all of those issues. So I would just, Rich Spent Mule Waterboard staff, I just wanted to say that his work on understanding that complexity was very helpful, and I'd encourage those types of relationships.
Lisa, thank you so much. You must have really enjoyed the pea soup slide that Patrick showed in the beginning. Patrick, did we put Safeco on that slide?
We did. There are a few that I missed, even in putting that together as we're walking through. I'm like, I should have included CDFA, ag commissioners. There's so many that we
you know
work
what?
with.
Let's keep that slide and keep adding to it. I think helping people understand this complexity. Lisa, thank you so much. I've just so nicely stated. All right, I do want to make sure that you all get to end on time. I know some of you have hard stops. So let's go ahead. We're going to move. Thank you, everyone, for this topic. Let's go ahead and move to the last question, the last focus area. And this is going to go to Christopher. Go ahead, Christopher, introduce yourself, and we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Chris Flower. I'm an engineering geologist in the Rancho Cordova office, and I work with the site cleanup program. So with time being short, I'm going to quickly tee up topic 6 here and give everybody an opportunity to weigh in. So on this topic, we're going to be looking at stakeholder engagement, what we've learned during the COVID-19 crisis, and ways that we can improve engagement equity. So next slide, please. So in March of last year, as many of you on the call have probably noticed, regional board staff were sent into a telecommute role. So offices were generally shut down, and we got introduced to Zoom and Teams and WebEx, and learned how to use mute functions and video functions and things of that nature. And as we're slowly working into a position where we're getting staff back into the office, the expectation and reality is that the virtual meeting is likely going to be here for the long term. So we kind of phrase this as the new reality. And kind of dovetailing that into the outreach survey that we put out, one of the questions that we presented to the regulated community and stakeholders is, what do you believe the Central Valley Water Board is not doing well? And from that, there were 2 things that really jumped out significantly. One of them is leveraging some of the technology that's out there to better engage with the community where distance issues may exist, and also developing ways to more equitably reach out to the community and better engage with the community. So those are a couple items that we're looking into, and we've got on the next slide, we'll have a poll where we're looking to get some feedback from the group here, and also a couple questions as well that we'd like to talk with you about.
Okay, so shall we launch the poll?
Yes, please.
All right. So have you interacted more with the board over the past year? And people are filling it in. We've got about 2/3 of the folks have responded. Thank you, everyone that's jumping in. I need 7 more answers. And theoretically, this is something everyone should know the answer to. This is an easy question, people.
Maybe they feel like they're voting someone off an island.
I know. We should have had a question like that, Clint. We could have asked if they wanted to vote off the island. We probably would have gotten some good answers on that one. All right, I think we can probably just pull this up. And here's what people said. So about the same, and the reason for this question, Chris, you want to explain a little bit about the reason for the question?
Yeah, so the driver behind the question was, as I noted, the board staff have been more engaged with some of these virtual platforms. And what we were trying to figure out is was that change something that made getting into contact or interacting with the board an easier process? You know, while we are a little more fluid in Teams, we know that other groups are more fluid in WebEx or some other program. So while we're not all using the exact same platform, we do have various platforms available. And with the rest of the community likely doing similar virtual get-togethers as we are, we're just trying to get a sense of whether or not that changed your engagement with board staff. And based on this, it looks like things generally were about the same. So maybe that was or wasn't beneficial, or maybe there wasn't a need to engage more often. But that was the driver behind that question, is just trying to get a sense of whether or not those other options made it more feasible for people to engage board staff.
Yeah. And something that we've heard so far, and I just posed this to the group. So once this ends, there's sort of a general theory that now that more of these tools are available, it's going to be easier to get to meetings. Certain communities can access these meetings a little bit easier with the travel not being there as a barrier. For example, we have someone on the line with us right now from near Shasta, which that would have been quite a burden to drive to Sacramento for a meeting. So that there's a little bit about how much of this should they keep, how much of a hybrid. There's also some discussion about, are there downsides already in the chat? And we've heard this from some of the other comments. There's a great deal of interest. Relationships are really important. This one-on-one, this way of being in a conversation. So that's what this is all about. We're just looking for some feedback and trying to find out the tools that you'd like the board to keep after the COVID crisis. Do you want to go ahead and continue to have more online meetings? Are there downsides to the board's shift to the meetings? Once again, hearing that people are concerned about not having the relationships that they might have had before. Also, you are in the chat already getting some comments about ways that you can make the actual online meetings work. So being able to see the other participants was something that people really enjoyed in this meeting, which they are not always able to see in a public meeting.
Lisa, this is Carl. I think Monday morning quarterbacking is kind of dangerous, but maybe one question that could have been asked is, would you have been in this meeting if you'd had to drive to Sacramento to attend?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. It's never too late to ask a question like that. So I will actually ask the group that, would you have come to this meeting? Just write yes or no. If you'd had to drive to the meeting, would you have come?
I would still have come, Carl.
You would have come, Patrick?
Absolutely.
I would have. I would have come as well.
And I'm afraid that anybody associated with the board, that's the question.
Yeah.
I see Debbie has a hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Debbie. And please reintroduce yourself.
Thanks. Sorry, that took a little bit for the Zoom for us to get there. Oh, and there goes my computer. So, so my answer would have been yes, I was there. You know what, I would actually, I've appreciated that we've been able to get more people to more places. But what has really been difficult for me, and especially as we grapple with really kind of hard water quality subjects, is that communication over Zoom is only a piece of communication. And we lose the ability to really engage with each other and see each other, see reactions, body language, know when we need to work through another issue. And so I know that it probably would be a technical investment and even a coordinating investment, but looking towards ways that we could find a hybrid where people could participate via Zoom, that you can see them, they can see people that are in the room, but that that we still have that ability to share and collaborate and really see all parts of communication. I think that part has been, to me, really missing. And so that's why I personally like to go to meetings. I like to see body language. I like to see reactions and know when what you said is understood, is comprehensive, or is that you need more further discussion on.
Thank you so much. JP, do you want to hop in and please introduce yourself?
Hi, JP Cataviella with Dairy Cares. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I'd like to say, would I have come to the meeting today? No, but not because of the drive, but because of the COVID. So this was necessary to do this today. And if it had not been available this way, I wouldn't have come. However, yes, I would have driven to the meeting if there was no risk for COVID. But I think we've learned a valuable lesson during COVID, and that we can take something from it. I think a hybrid could work, but we need to delve a little deeper into what that means. For me, I don't think we should get rid of in-person meetings, but I don't know that we need to do everything in person. There's a benefit to an in-person meeting. There's also benefits in terms of convenience and access for video meetings. So I think maybe some way where we can alternate those types of meetings, or offer that. The comment was made before, think about the differences between what that means. There's oftentimes these days, if you want to comment during a meeting, you must register in advance. And you don't even know if you're going to want to comment during that meeting. So it's something you kind of have to really plan ahead for. There's a lot of in-person meetings I've gone to where I had no plan to comment, but then something came up, maybe in a executive officer's report or something like that, where I felt the need to comment. And so thinking about those types of issues, I think is important. And then finally, one type of hybrid meeting that we have not yet mastered in our society is that meeting where there are some people involved in person, and some are either phoning in or videoing in. Mm-hmm. This is often not done well, and the people who are videoing in do not have the same level of access as the people who are in the room. And so then a lot of people like me would just go ahead and drive to the meeting, because you're not going to really get meaningful access. Whereas if it were a video meeting only, you would get the meaningful access, which is sort of ironic. What can we do about that? I think there are some models out there. There is probably some investment that needs to be made to make that work. But again, and I hadn't meant to bring them up twice in the same day, but the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District does a fantastic job of, at least with the technology of a few years ago, of making it possible for people to participate in meetings and feel like they're there. Now, they'll have a simultaneous webinar, and that in that case, access is limited, but they'll have multiple locations, where so their board members don't all have to go to the same room. They can all meet
Right.
in different rooms, and they'll have the audience can go to their nearest air. So there's 3 different offices they can go to. Really reduces the driving time, which is in their interest because they're trying to keep the air clean.
Right.
But I think we all want that. Anyway, I've gone on long enough, but I think there's a model there of that. That's an agency that not only does its job, but also is really good at engaging with the public about doing the job and hearing from the public and using tools that make it easier to talk to them. So,
JP, thank you. Those are great ideas. Carl, go ahead.
Yes, JP, this is Carl. Thank you for, I think, great insight, and particularly talking about the air district. I've had a great concern for years when I see people who drive tremendous distances, who a lot of people in the Central Valley live a long ways from Sacramento. And not all of them can get off from work for the full day to come to Sacramento and stay there 3 minutes and then return home. I've always thought that we needed a better way of operating so that we could give these people the opportunity to make their very important points in front of the board. So I think you brought up some ways that we might do that. You point out, I think very correctly, that integrating both a virtual meeting and an in-person meeting is not the easiest thing in the world to do, and how to maintain the value of both, I think, is going to be a challenge. But I think I'm up for the challenge. I think we need to find ways to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I know, Carl, you and I have actually been in meetings like that with DWR, and so we know they work. I want to just check in real quick. Eric, I'm getting a little nervous about time, but if you have a minute to make a comment, and then Tess as well. And then I'm going to have Megan just quickly summarize what's in the chat. And then from there, we'll move into closing comments. And Patrick, I'm stealing a little bit of your time from the closing comments, only because we've been commenting all along.
Yeah. No, I was about to comment that I think we can do the wrap up pretty quickly.
So I want to just, I think we've got some great input so far. Eric, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I think a lot of the comments that are being made are great in terms of improving engagement during this, troubling times. I think that the poll really does a good job of demonstrating that, for folks, engagement looks a lot different, and whatever is accessible to them should be a diverse amount of options. I think that one that is really one we can look at is the state legislature. Despite them doing remote, streaming of certain hearings, there's also the opportunity to go into in person and testify on certain bills and provisions. And so I think that when we look at, underrepresented communities who may have barriers to engaging online or just limited computer proficiency, having the opportunity to make such comments in person could be really helpful. But I also wanted to also highlight that, it would be very helpful as well to increase engagement is as well to have the Spanish speaking option or just option in various languages. I think this would really be beneficial in terms of opening and broadening the opportunities for as much of the public to participate. And I just wanted to highlight that doing a dynamic approach could be really helpful to just broadening participation.
Thank you, Eric. I actually have worked in some meetings also where there's been an in-person, multiple language choice, which is sometimes a little bit easier to do, and simulcast, which that is expensive. But the technology, several people have been noting that the technology is getting better. Thank you for that input. Tess, go ahead and unmute and introduce, and I'm going to have you kind of wrap this one up.
Yes, my name is Tess Dunham. I'm an attorney at Constrays and Conway, and I represent a number of dischargers and groups before the Regional Water Board on all different types of matters, from policy, regulatory to enforcement matters. I do think it's really important that when we get into the quasi-judicial and in the enforcement world, webinar or digital meetings are exceedingly difficult, and I think create a huge disadvantage especially to the individual or the party that may be subject to the enforcement action. So I want to make sure that, I think the water boards have done a great job at definitely, moving to a digital in the circumstances that we were in. But I would hate for us to stay that way, especially when we get into those types of proceedings that really have an impact on somebody's right with their personal rights or their rights as to how they operate their business from a waste discharge perspective. Also, it does, I think, create, not so much the Central Valley Board, but I have been on some long all day board meetings where, you have staff that goes on for 8 hours and there is no opportunity for dischargers to be able to interject themselves, even to if they have an objection to make in any type of a proceeding, we are locked out, right? And so you don't have the ability to actually exercise legal rights that you may otherwise have in quasi-judicial proceedings. So I do want to make sure we don't lose that. Understand on the policy side, it's a little bit different, but I do think it's essentially important in our enforcement quasi-judicial world that we get back to allowing those to be in person, so we do not truncate the rights of individuals in such important proceedings.
Thank you, Tess. Megan, I'm going to have you just do a quick recap of the chat, and we'll move into closing comments.
Sure. So we've got a lot of participation, whether they would have attended in person or not. It's mixed. Some said yes, others said no, due to distance of driving. Then there were a lot of reiteration of some of the comments that we've heard, saying that, remote is helpful, but face-to-face is important. And there are certain things that you miss when you're not in person. Some suggestions about other models to follow, like we can learn from schools about how to have a hybrid of both in-person and remote. And then a reiteration of the fact that underserved communities might have trouble with also with both pieces of in-person and remote, with the in-person being having to drive and take time off and the time of day, things like that. And access to technology and technological literacy and things like that. So
let me just flag that really quickly. So for that one, I think that's another area where maybe we, the people that help run meetings, can be a lot stronger on this idea of reasonable accommodation. So for example, when I do a lot of tribal work, and we do all kinds of things with phones and things that you really have to accommodate when people do not have good broadband, and that's just a reality of this particular region. Sorry, Megan, keep going.
Yeah, so then one other last comment is talking about the availability of having in-person meetings at different field offices simultaneously, so you can have people attend in person without having to drive quite so far. So your field offices in Reading or Fresno, as well as Sacramento, as a hybrid model that can approach.
Great.
And I think that's about all of the comments thus far.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for the summary. All right. Well, we are down to the last 10 minutes. It's my practice, and I think everyone would agree that we will end on time. So with that, I'm going to turn this back to Patrick and Clinton for any kind of last thoughts they might have. And then we want to leave a little bit of time to the board members to make their thoughts known as well. So Patrick, take it away.
Yeah, so next slide. I just really at this point want to thank everybody who's been involved in this effort. Our IT team, Jean, Bob, Mindy, and a lot of the other members who helped make this happen, as well as the members of the Strategic Planning Committee themselves, who kind of put this together on a very short order. I've heard a lot of things today, some new ideas to me actually that are actually really good ideas that I think will work to integrate into the board's strategic plan. I thank you for your input with respect to cost of compliance, homelessness issues, everything that we discussed today. I think one of the things that we will be on the lookout for, and is mirrored by the comments coming in to the chat, with respect to the remote meeting participation, I think you see exactly kind of how I would expect it to kind of shake out, in that the folks whose job it is to appear before the board probably would have made it out to the meeting. And the people who have other day jobs and are very interested in the board's work or would not necessarily have been able to make it out to the strategic planning session. I think that mirrors what we see in terms of the feedback from our board meetings as well. So while I certainly anticipate that we will be back in person someday, hopefully soon, I would want to make sure that we do advocate for retaining that ability for stakeholders who may not be the stakeholder that is sitting in front of the board with their permit on the line or their civil liability order on the line, but for the other interested persons that have a viewpoint to contribute, maybe in the context of a planning action or something else, to be able to talk via the Zoom platform or whatever platform we may choose. I think that's not going away. And I think that the lessons from COVID-19 have taught us that that is doable. And that also, big flag here, that it does not replace the in-person meetings, not just in Sacramento, but also throughout the region. As kind of Bruce has been showing, sometimes you have to get in the field to understand what you're regulating. Sometimes you have to get in Bakersfield, in Fresno, in Redding, on the mountains, in the foothills, to understand what consequences the decisions that we make may have. But I want to thank everybody for their hard work in getting this done, especially the Strategic Planning Committee and our IT department. And thanks go out to Lisa, you and your team for helping us make this happen on such short notice. That's kind of my summary here. Next slide, Jean, if you could. And I'll just briefly say what we're planning on doing next. We plan on having a discussion of this forum, a write-up of this forum in front of the board in April. We will discuss priorities with the board as part of the strategic planning effort in June. The Strategic Planning Committee and myself will be working to draft the strategic plan itself over the summer and hopefully have it in front of the board for adoption in August of 2021. So thanks everybody for hanging in there, for continuing to work on this effort through the pandemic. And I think that about wraps it up for me. Tess is commenting, yes, we will be, like everything else, we will be putting out drafts of the strategic plan before we finally adopt it, before the board adopts it. So that's what our goal is. We're working pretty hard to kind of put these pieces together to have something for the board in August. With that, I will turn it over to Board Chair Carl Longley and Mark Bradford for closing statements.
I'm going to interrupt for just a second. I just want to note, Clint, this has been a labor of love for you. As I wanted to just take a minute and just say this is like your baby coming into this. So any thoughts before we jump to Carl?
No, I mirror everything Patrick said, and certainly defer my time to Chair Longley and Board Member Bradford.
That's great. And then I also want to acknowledge Danny Merkley making a comment about driving on 99. And I want to say that I miss getting pea soup. And so with that, then I'm going to send this to Carl. Carl and Mark, take it away.
Yes, Mark, do you have any ending comments?
There we go. Yeah, I guess I really appreciate everybody's input. And as I said earlier, this is definitely one of the more productive Zoom meetings I've been on, and that is saying something. But it seems to me that there's just no shortage of issues that this board needs to address. So over and over in the board meetings, it always astounds me how many programs we have and how many experts there are on both sides of the table discussing these issues. I mean, today we only discussed 6 of the priorities that came through on the survey, and we've chewed up all our time easily. It seems like busy people always tend to deal with what's in front of them first, which is sort of a tactical approach to life. I know that's true with me. And I think this discussion today just emphasizes how important it is to have a strategic plan that we can go back to on a regular basis and just try to maintain our focus. Some of these issues on cost management versus fee-based regulatory agencies are a real ongoing issue. And I know Patrick wrestles with it every day. I'm also sensitive to the comment that Danny Markley made, indicating that San Luis Obispo study, which documented the cost of compliance going from $100 an acre to $900 an acre over the past several years. So those are big issues, and nobody wants to see small farmers driven out of the market, obviously, but that's something that is going to require some triage, I think, on the board's part. And it's complicated again by the bureaucracy. People have mentioned the alphabet soup. There's just so many agencies involved in every one of these issues. You could fill up a binder, I think. And finally, I would just say on the meeting front, this meeting has been more productive than some of our in-person meetings, frankly, because we've gotten more input. I like the chat feature. Obviously has some drawbacks, but as we come out of COVID, I hope some hybrid approach will be pursued. And the most valuable meetings I've had have probably been in the field, honestly. We've done field trips to dairies and mines, managed wetlands, and I've learned more on those trips than I have reading through briefing papers. So anyway, thanks to, I want to thank the committee members and Patrick and Clint for spearheading this on the board side, and Lisa and the Stantec folks for facilitating. It's been a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. There's not much left for me to say after Patrick and Mark and Clint. I'd like also to compliment staff on putting this together. Lisa for her unbelievable ability to keep things moving and hitting high points. And certainly I'd like to thank the participants in the day's meeting. This is not like the last experience I had. We have received tremendous valuable input. To begin to comment on it at this point would take another 3-4 hours, so I'm not going to go there. Except the last one. I think that it's going to be very difficult to sort out how we hold our meetings in the future. This has been, as Mark pointed out, a very invaluable experience that we probably would not, or a very valuable experience that we would not have had if it had been in Sacramento. So I think that, and also the trips that we have taken to facilities, either individually or together as a group, I think allow you to better see what's going on on the discharger end, or in the issues that are being faced by disadvantaged communities. All of those and many others help us as we go forward in making policy, interpreting policy, working as regulators in the this very difficult world that we live in. With that, I'm looking forward to further discussion on the comments that have been made, and I encourage you to, as you think about today's meeting, to submit your emails, letters, and so forth prior to us getting together again and continue to pursue this very important effort that we're on to put together a strategic plan that truly addresses our concerns. And I might point out that really what this effort has become is more than a piece of a document, a written document. It is a mechanism for dialogue that I think has turned out to be extremely important. And it's that dialogue really which is at the heart of arriving at what we want to arrive at. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All righty. Well, I think I'm going to pretend that it's exactly noon. And so who is in charge of closing this up? Is that Bob and Eugene that do that?
Yeah, I would. This is Bob.
All right. Well, thank you,
Take it away.
everybody. Let's give the staff a hand if you wouldn't mind. What a wonderful work everyone did. Thank you so much, and hopefully talk to you soon. So with that, we'll head on out. Thank you. Yay.
Okay, I will end the meeting. I'll stop the YouTube
Hey,
stream.
team. Good job. Hey, Patrick, we can do a debrief if you like. So we'll maybe schedule something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Great job, team. Great job. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
All right. Take care.
You can end for all, Bob.
Yeah, I could do. I'll stop it from here. I want to save out the chat one last time.